Krista?
Great. Thanks so much, Donna. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today, and thanks for joining at the end of this Monday for those of you on the East Coast. We're excited to announce a new grant program administered by Enterprise Community Partners, our Design for Resilience program. Today, we'll be sharing with you the objectives of this grant opportunity and more logistical information about how you can submit a successful application and what awardees will be expected to comply with over the period of the grant program. My name is Krista Egger. I'm Director of Enterprise Green Communities, and I'm based in our Washington, D.C. office. And I'm joined on the webinar today by my colleague Lori Schumann, who's Program Director of our National Resilience Initiatives and based in our New York City office, and you'll hear from her in just a few minutes. As for today's agenda, we'll be covering these 4 topics. We'll introduce you to Enterprise and to our Enterprise Green Communities program at large, just for context so that you can see where this grant program fits into our programmatic objectives of Enterprise. Then we'll spend time reviewing the parameters of the new Design for Resilience grant program, and then we'll reserve at least 20 minutes at the end of the hour for your questions. So to start, Enterprise Community Partners is a national nonprofit founded in 1982 by Mr. Jim Rouse. We're based in Columbia, Maryland, and we focus on increasing the quantity and improving the quality of affordable housing around the country. And over the past 35 years, we've worked to bring together the people and the resources needed to create affordable housing in strong neighborhoods. We've invested more than $24 billion. We've helped create more than 358,000 homes, and we've touched millions of lives. And we do this across deploying new and innovative capital solutions, deploying and creating new programmatic solutions, programs such as this grant opportunity, for instance, and through federal, state, and local policy initiatives. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Lori to share an overview of how our interest in resilience has really manifested across Enterprise Community Partners.
Thanks, Krista. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you on the West Coast. Thanks so much for dialing on this webinar today. Just to give you a little bit of context as to what we're trying to promote in the resilience space, we know that extreme weather events across the nation are growing more intense. Since 1980, there have been more than $260 billion in flood damages alone. This does not account for the multiple heat waves that we are contending with year after year, the droughts, fires, as well as seismic risk and other risks associated with these events. And they're becoming more frequent by the year. We know that when disaster strikes, low-income residents are in a very precarious position. Often they're sited in communities that are extremely vulnerable to these impacts and hazards, and they have less resources to recover in a timely manner so that these events really do impact low and moderate income communities disproportionately. And we believe at Enterprise that minimizing the impacts of these weather events for these vulnerable communities is a smart and effective way to deal with supporting their resilience. We believe that investing in these at-risk communities in advance of a storm or event is the best way to move forward and protect these communities and their assets and infrastructure. Our initiative across the country really seeks to strengthen communities writ large and so that they're better able to deal with these kind of events. We define resilience really as the capacity for households, communities, and regions to adapt to the very many changing climate events and volatility that we're seeing across the country. And we know that resilient communities often share several features. First of all, that there's redundancies in place that allow systems to be backed up in case of failure, that there's feedback loops in place among the community that ensure that lessons learned from past events are incorporated into current and future design and operations of facilities and infrastructure. We also think that resilient communities have incorporated stakeholder opinions and insights into how the communities are designed and built, that green spaces and housing and community facilities all have built within them the insights and have incorporated the voices of the many users of those facilities, and that's important to steward those facilities. And then finally, a resilient design should have a commitment to establishing social equity and cultural resilience, which is, of course, critical to fostering all of the connections needed before and after an event. And so simply put, our vision for a resilient nation is as follows: that housing organizations and owners design and operate their affordable housing sensitive to the needs of their residents and their community, that the stakeholders, again, that have helped to design and build and foster a sense of integration into the actual facilities that are built, and so that the facilities and communities can bounce back quickly after an event. And that finally, local and state and federal planning processes are shaped and supported so that they can protect vulnerable communities and promote the kind of planning that will engender resilience over a long term. Enterprise has been working in this field for many years. We started out after Hurricane Katrina and deployed an entire team to New Orleans to help figure out how to build back after that enormous catastrophic event. And we work on several levels. In the capital sphere, we like to identify how to finance affordable housing and underwrite affordable housing so that it can be helpful and ensure that it can promote community opportunity. So some of the key projects we've worked on have included Faubourg Lafitte, which is in New Orleans, and it's a beautiful complex that we support and developed with some key partners to promote resilient design in New Orleans. We also promote our work through what we call solutions, which is, as Krista mentioned, creating criteria and tools like the Green Communities criteria that help to build green design and promote sustainability throughout our nation's affordable housing pipeline. We've also built a whole series of tools that we call the Ready to Respond Tools for Resilience, which will actually come into play with this program, as you'll hear later, to promote resilience for multifamily housing and promote emergency readiness. And all of the tools and solutions we develop are always built with partners in the ground, on the field, with multifamily housing partners that are able to provide us with their real-world experience that we use to build the tools to support the community at large. And then finally, we like to work to promote policy and programs that are able to respond to the needs on the ground. So we've weighed in on lots of different topics related to resilience, and we still do. We're very invested in understanding how to support and strengthen our flood insurance program. So we've created studies like the multifamily flood insurance affordability study with several partners for the City of New York, and other analysis that we provide to support first responders on the ground, developers and housing organizations and owners, as well as agencies that are looking to try to figure out what the needs of the communities that they're serving are. And now I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Krista.
Thanks, Lori. So one of the examples of those solutions where Enterprise is driving the consideration of resilience is through our Enterprise Green Communities program. The Enterprise Green Communities criteria is a national green building standard designed exclusively for the affordable housing sector. It's integrated into the QAPs of more than half of the country's states, and the Enterprise Green Communities criteria represents an ambitious yet achievable framework for greening new and existing affordable housing. In our 2015 criteria, the current version of the program, we've integrated a focus on resilience. And in the context of housing and in the built environment, we're looking at resilience measures which address physical building features for fortifying building infrastructure, as well as building operations features, so different protocols and procedures in place in order to minimize interruption and return to regular operations after a disaster as quickly as possible, And then finally, resilience features related to communicating with residents, so building social resilience, so communicating with and empowering residents to prepare for evacuation or for sheltering in place and providing updated information during emergency events. And so we do this trying to address resilience in those three ways through different criteria that are interspersed throughout the Integrated Green Communities criteria. It's initially incorporated in the criteria in the integrated design section, the integrated design category of our criteria, which include different process-based measures. It's our experience that an integrated design process can lead to optimal outcomes related to achieving a development project's goals, and it's a fluid process and it's a very collaborative process which takes into account decisions from the perspective of a multitude of stakeholders at the beginning of a design process rather than later on. And all projects pursuing certification to the 2015 Enterprise Green Communities criteria are required to follow our Criterion 1-2A, which is called Resilient Communities Designed for Resilience, which is a fairly simple ask. It asks each project that is pursuing certification to consider their project location, their construction type, and their resident population, and then select one measure from our list of resilient criteria, which will be the most likely to improve the resilience of that project. And the list of resilient criteria includes 11 different measures, the titles of which you can see in your screen here. The first, 1-3A, is the process I just described, a light touch consideration of hazards relevant to a project and then selecting one of these other measures to improve the resilience of your project. The second resilient criteria, 1-3B, which is called Resilient Communities Multi-Hazard Risk/Vulnerability Assessment, builds upon that 1-3A process by requiring a really robust property vulnerability assessment conducted in collaboration with residents, community stakeholders, and building professionals. And then the other criteria, whose names you see on the screen, are either specific design strategies or systems that improve property resilience in a very targeted way. For instance, everything from water reuse to islandable power systems. And I'm sharing this information with you about the criteria not because certification of the criteria is a required condition of this grant program. It is not a required condition of this grant program, but I'm sharing this information with you so that you're aware of from where Criterion 1-3B, that multi-hazard risk vulnerability assessment process, which is the focus of this grant program, comes from. So now I'll hand it over to Lori to share more detail about how we'd like for you to engage with this process described in Criterion 1-3B in respect to the RFP.
Thanks, Krista. So Criteria 1-3B really calls for the developer at the pre-development phase to collaborate with their project team members, their key stakeholders, and community members to assess, identify, and implement achievable actions that they can take to enhance the resilience of their housing project. So compliance with this particular criteria requires there's partnership with your residents, the resiliency experts that you're in touch with, and allied organizations that you work with on your project team. Essentially, we're going to be, through this process, observing 5 affordable housing development organizations around the country in different regions that are all at the pre-development stage of their housing projects to understand how they're developing a multi-hazard climate action plan for their housing property. So we're trying to understand essentially how the field of affordable housing developers is able to interpret 1-3B and move forward and implement a plan. And the idea is we will be able to use this information to understand how to support the community at large. The purpose of the project is really to support the core capacity needs of affordable housing organizations to be able to protect their properties, residents, and their core assets from extreme climate impacts. This is really the first and most critical step that you have to take as you move forward to build a climate-smart housing facility. In order to get started on this project, if you're awarded this funding, and even if you're not, if you just want to go ahead and do it on your own accord, but we know you're all interested in the funding, you can actually or should be assigning a project champion to lead the process and take responsibility for the sustainability and resiliency measures. And this can be a variety of partners that we can talk about later in the Q&A. So your scope of work essentially under this program to comply with 1.3b is as follows. The first step you want to take when you're thinking about incorporating climate assessment into your project is you're going to want to assess your property for its vulnerability to a variety of the impacts I mentioned before. So you're going to want to clearly identify the relevant hazards that you're facing, which if you're in California, you might be looking at heat or drought. You could be looking at seismic. You could even be looking at flooding. You're going to want to assess the likely impacts that that hazard will have on your project and your project vulnerabilities. So if you are building a housing facility and you're building it for seniors and power loss is a demonstrated problem in your community, you're going to want to make sure you might have a generator in place or some kind of backup system, or some kind of load shedding system. So that's step one. Step two is after you hold the assessment, you're going to want to hold a facilitated charrette or community meeting with your team and your residents or your stakeholders to essentially engage them in a conversation about how to respond and how the impacts apply to the given project. After this engagement, you can update your resiliency mapping. You'll be able to, through this process, document your process, data sources, and stakeholders involved in identifying the hazards, impacts, and project vulnerabilities. And we're going to ask you to document your work through multiple media formats. You can use whatever you'd like, but we'd like to be able to see what your process is as you're seeking to comply with 1.3b. And then finally, you're going to want to identify, in the third step, you're going to want to identify and implement your response. So what this will look like is you identify your design and construction strategies to address your top risks as identified by the vulnerability assessment that you just conducted. And then you're going to assess the ability of these interventions to mitigate or adapt to your climate risks. So if you choose to select a generator, you're going to want to identify how that generator will help support your power loss. So it's going to be a very integrated and iterative process that you're going to go through. And we're going to ask you to prepare a summary of the strategies that you considered in response to the assessment and a description of the process you used to get there. And your deliverables to us are as follows. We'd like you to outline how you went ahead and incorporated and implemented 1.3b. We're going to want you to track and share time and the cost of implementation of this particular criteria point, because we want to understand how much energy and resource it actually took you to comply with it. And then we're going to ask you to participate in a monthly community practice phone call that we're going to be leading every month throughout the grant period, which will run from August to November. These calls will be one-hour calls where you'll be able to get on the phone with your 4 other partners around the country, and we're going to discuss different themes that come up in your work as well as trends that you're seeing. You're going to be getting a lot out of participating in this project, we hope. And one of the things that we like to say at the outset, you'll be getting a $10,000 grant from us to define and achieve your climate resiliency goals, and you can spend this on pulling in a resiliency expert or a variety of expertise that you might need to bring in to implement this project. We're going to be able to provide you with some technical assistance to support you through the process. As you have questions, around your charrette or figuring out what your hazards might be, we will be available to support you through that process as well. You're going to have peer support from peers throughout the country in the affordable multifamily housing space that can support your efforts, as I mentioned. You're going to have an introduction to some really great technical experts in the field of resilience that we've been working with through the years that we will introduce to you, both through the community practice calls as well as in the intervals. And lastly, and most importantly, you'll be able to be part of an effort around the country to help scale resiliency capital planning through the multifamily sector. So by being part of this project, you will actually influence the way that the rest of the affordable housing sector is able to plan for climate change and climate impacts accordingly. So you might be asking at this point, this sounds great. Well, how am I going to get started, and what kind of tools can I use to get started on my work? We happen to have created several tools with the support of many of our multifamily housing partners that we think are going to be very helpful for you as you move forward to implement 1.3b. And these are all available to you to support your efforts. So these tools that I mentioned are helpful for helping you understand your infrastructure resilience and how you incorporate climate change adaptation mitigation in your housing development, as well as a tool on how to actually build an emergency plan. And we've got lots of videos and lots of components within these tools that can help you on your way to complying with this. One of the main tools that we'd like to be that we're going to be sharing with you, however, is a resiliency capital needs tool assessment. This is essentially going to help you identify the vulnerability of your building in the pre-development phase. It will be a checklist that you will use to help support your pre-development planning, and we will provide this to you. It's not an open source tool, so this will be provided only to this cohort for this program. And this can be actually used by your architect or your engineer. It's really aimed at helping a design professional on your team move forward and assess their facility. You don't necessarily have to hire someone with particular resiliency expertise to use this tool. And of course, there's some other really fantastic tools out there in the universe of climate mitigation adaptation tools that I'd like to just call out. FLASH, which is the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, has some really excellent tools that can help you just understand exactly what your vulnerabilities are at the state and local level. FEMA's got some great tools on flood vulnerability, and we would recommend that you use those at the local level. And then, of course, there's an entire toolkit through the National Climate Assessment, which has lots of great resources that you can use and incorporate into your work. You can find all of our tools here at this link, and we've got videos and we've got a lot of other things. And so one of the aspects and one of the takeaways you'll have from this project is you'll have some in-house capacity and capability to do this kind of work through other projects that you work on and with partners that you work with. So we hope that this will seed a professional at your organization that will then become able to do this time and time again. So just at this point, I'd like to turn over to Krista to walk us through the logistics.
Thanks, Lori. So in order to apply, we'd encourage you to read the full RFP, and that's available on Enterprise's grants webpage, the website address of which is on your screen here, and pay particular attention to the scope section of that RFP, which outlines the process to which you'd be committing to. And Criterion 1.3b is included as an appendix to that RFP as well. So take a close read of that. when you're ready to apply, we're going to ask that you submit your application through SlideRoom. SlideRoom is a website portal or website application which will walk you through the different questions that the RFP requires answers to. And you'll find a link to the SlideRoom application site for this grant program from the RFP and also from our grants webpage. So you can find information there. If you have questions after today's webinar about anything related to this grant program, you can send them to resilience@enterprisecommunity.org, and we'd be happy to address your questions there. And then as far as timeline goes, proposals are due about 2 weeks from today, so on Friday, July 21st. We'll announce the awards of the 5 organizations that win the funding no later than August 7th. And the period of performance for this grant program goes through the end of the year. I'm really looking for the majority of the deliverables to be complete in November so that we have the time around the holidays in December to wrap up any of the final reporting in regards to the time and effort that it took you to comply with the process, as well as just general feedback about capacity needs and changes in your organization. So these are some of the logistics for applying. And I'll let you know that some of the criteria that we'll be using to make the selection of awardees will include demonstrated experience of your organization with affordable housing development, demonstrated experience of your organization's commitment to addressing resilience through housing or just through partnerships and with other organizations in your area and prior experience with climate emergency events, as well as how your organization will approach the expectations listed in the scope section of the RFP and fulfill the deliverables of this project. What is key to this effort and what I think is unique about this grant program is that this is not a theoretical exercise in planning for some hypothetical event in terms of resilience for a project. We want you to select a specific project for which your organization is working on and is in the pre-development stage of planning to really identify the hazards that project is susceptible to, and then integrate responses to that hazard into your design and planning documents, so that when time comes for construction or for rehab or for engaging with residents, that you'll have a plan in place that this program helped facilitate. So we've gone through a brief description of context as to who Enterprise is and who Green Communities is. Lori has given a great overview of Enterprise's interest in the resilience space and talked through the highlights of this grant program. And now we'd be happy for the rest of the time that we have together to address any questions that you all have.
Terrific. And just a reminder that if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box, which is located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. If the box isn't open, just click on where it says Q&A, and it will open right up. Send your questions to all panelists so we can be sure to see them. Just a note as we get started also that this, in case you didn't hear that at the beginning, this session is being recorded, and a copy of the recording as well as of these slides will be made available to all attendees within 48 hours of today's session. And looking at the Q&A box, we have a question regarding the details of Criterion 1.3b. Aside from what is in the appendix of the RFP, is there any more information on that criteria, or is that it? That's what's in the appendix?
I can take that one. That is it, actually. So the full Criterion 1.3b is in the appendix of the RFP. One of the reasons that we're launching this grant program is because the actual process of conducting that multi-hazard risk or vulnerability assessment for affordable housing is not common practice, and we'd like to use this opportunity of time and funding and technical assistance and peer network to help organizations flesh out how they would in their own organizations, respond to the request of 1.3b with the assistance of some of those tools that Laurie previewed just a few moments ago as well. But to answer your question directly, everything is there in the RFP and the appendix.
Okay. My next question is, at what stage are projects eligible to qualify for the grant? Site control, 100% financial commitment, et cetera?
I can take that one too. This is Krista. So projects that are eligible for this opportunity are ones that will, whose timing aligns with our grant period of performance timing as well, which means the project design strategies and assessment and then implementation of interventions into your documents must be completed before the end of the year. So we are looking for projects that do have site control. Whether or not they have 100% commitment of financing, we can be a little bit flexible on. If your project does not have 100% commitment of financing, we'd ask you to please include in your application, when it asks for more details about your particular project, to include information that can make us feel confident that the project is viable and that the planning work that you'll be doing through this grant program will be implemented in an actual project in the near future.
I just want to echo what Chris just said, just emphasize, I mean, we're really looking for real implementation happening of this resiliency planning, because we don't want to see a theoretical exercise. We really want to see some bricks and mortar build out of the work at hand. So it's really important that you have something planned and a game plan for achieving that.
And our next question, is there any benefit tying into local or city-based climate plans that have already been developed? Or are you not interested in funding projects involved in these areas since they already have one?
I can feel that. You know, there's a lot of great work happening around the country regarding resiliency planning. The 100 Resilient Cities has been doing some terrific work with their chief resiliency officer network that's been established. And so a lot of cities around the country now have and are putting forth resiliency plans for the respective cities that do touch on the climate hazards that city or municipality is facing. And so by all means, tap into that and use that kind of information to support your assessment. It's also worth mentioning that lots of your respective communities have hazard mitigation plans that are already developed as well. So that's another great resource that you can pull from to inform your vulnerability assessment. So by all means, leverage what you can to support your work in this space.
And our next question, will applications for properties that are more disaster prone be more likely to be selected?
I can feel that the more exposed your property is or your site is, the better candidate you are for implementing the mitigation or adaptation strategies that you'll be putting forth in this proposal and in this process. So if you're a community that has repeated exposure to flooding or repeated exposure to drought or fire, that's important to consider. We're looking for a range of organizations across the country, so you know, strengthen your application as best as you can by noting what events have happened and the likeliness that you're going to actually fold in the work you're doing in this process into your final development. So there would be more urgency there. If you had more repeated exposure, you would probably have a lot more urgency to fold in what you learned through this process into your project, and that would bode well for your application.
And our next question, we have a new development funded that will be in design development through the end of September. Do you think this timeline works with your grant period?
Yes, I think it could be feasible. We'd encourage you to include information about your timeline in your application.
Okay. Next question, can this be used for existing housing projects, or is it only intended for pre-development projects?
If you're planning a rehab of an existing project, yes, please apply. We'd love to see rehabs as well as new construction come through.
And is this for multifamily only?
This is for affordable housing only. We'll consider single family as well as multifamily.
Okay. And there was a question in regards to, will scattered site multifamily qualify?
Scattered site multifamily, sure, yes, as long as you will be, if it's new construction or if it's a rehab, as long as you are planning work to occur on all of those homes within that scattered site property that would be relevant to the planning exercise of this program, yes, scattered site would be just fine.
Okay. If our city has a robust disaster plan related to climate action, can we leverage some of the resources and practices from that plan in collaboration with the city?
That sounds like an exciting opportunity to create partnership with your city agencies, and absolutely where you can leverage this opportunity to find more additional funding or additional partnership or introduce yourself to additional stakeholders, absolutely. This should seed whatever effort you're trying to lead on at your facility level, so absolutely.
And can you repeat how many awards will be made?
We'll be making 5 awards.
Great. Next question, is there any preference as to focused areas, or is the grant competitive across regions nationally? Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, the program is competitive across the country. We would actually prefer not to award the 5 slots to organizations which are all responding to the same type of hazard. We'd like to have some variety. So there's not a preference in terms of trying to locate all of the awards within one particular region.
Mm-hmm. If your project is for mitigation in a flood zone to protect an already built affordable housing property, is it eligible, and would we still do the assessment since we already know what the vulnerability is?
That's a great question. If you know what the vulnerability is, that's the first step. The biggest step is figuring out how to mitigate and how to design your facility or your system to be able to correspond to the needs of your stakeholders, which includes your residents. So we mentioned you'll be holding a charrette meeting. That's where a lot of the heavy lifting will come forward in terms of designing your resilient intervention. So identifying your assessment is just one step, but that's, again, the meat of this is the actual engagement and the design of the mitigation solution.
Regarding scattered sites, sort of a question on the definition of scattered, must they all be within a certain city, or could they be further out?
They could be further out. I think I'd go back to the answer a few minutes ago about that question about are scattered sites viable or not, and we're looking for the projects that are a focus of this program to have an opportunity to implement strategies in response to the hazards and the needs, the risks that are identified. So as long as work is occurring on all of those properties that are scattered across a certain geography, it would be eligible for the program.
Are multifamily projects only being considered, or would mixed use and community planning apply?
As long as there is a substantial component of affordable housing in the project, mixed use and mixed income would be just fine.
Okay. Are grant funds intended for planning only, or are the funds intended for implementation, such as purchasing a generator, et cetera?
That's a good question. Since our grant period is so short in comparison to the development cycle of a project, we know that, or we're expecting at least, that the projects which are participating in this program, when we'll be working together over the next several months, will have the opportunity to assess what risks are relevant to their project, and then to identify strategies that they could implement in response to those, and then really implement those strategies within their plans and their drawings and their specs or their scopes of work, so that when the time comes to actually retrofit the property or build it from scratch, that those directions will be integral to ensuring that the project will be responding to the risks of the property. So we don't anticipate that projects will be purchasing actual building systems with this grant money, just given the nature of the timing.
Okay. Is there a sense that remoteness would be a factor to design for, to be resilient against? Our communities are very remote from any large urban areas.
This program is not necessarily for city or urban environments. We're looking for a variety of participants, and if you're in a rural or remote area, by all means, please apply, because you do face a variety of hazards that are very particular to your situation. If you're in a remote location, you have a lot of vulnerability with regards to your electrical and water and food distribution. So please, by all means, apply.
Okay. Is there a minimum project size, number of units?
No, there's not.
Okay. Regarding the statement, awardees will have ready access to technical assistance from enterprise funds to support the hire of a resilience expert. To clarify, how will TA from enterprise work, and are the funds for a resilience expert from the $10,000 grant?
Great question. So the $10,000 grant is designed to be available to pay for the expenses for which a project team would go through by following this process, for which they would likely not normally, the actions they would not normally take in the course of standard development, when resilience might not be front and center. So the costs, those incremental costs, if you will, do include the time of perhaps a resilience or a building science expert to help you identify what hazards are relevant to your project, and then to identify really how to respond to those in a wise way by thinking of strategies that are going to provide the most value for your project. The funds could also pay for the additional time your organization's staff people will take by participating in this process and interacting with resident stakeholders, for instance, to ensure that your strategies are going to respond to the needs of your residents. So the $10,000, we do not right now have a prescriptive budget for how that must be spent, but we do intend for that funding to pay for those incremental costs associated with the process, which does include that quote-unquote resilience expert, which you'll want to engage to some degree to help you through the process. And then as to the question of the TA provided by enterprise, so in part, that will be assistance over the phone in those monthly community of practice calls that we'll convene, as well as other phone calls or emails or conversations or advice that you could have with our staff people, primarily Lori, over the course of the next several months. We won't be making site visits, but it will be remote help that can direct you to different resources or help actually walk you through any issues. I don't know, Lori, if you want to add anything to that TA part as well.
You know, thanks, Krista. One of the things we'd like you to consider is there's a lot of, this is an emerging field. I mean, there's a lot of great experts out in the field that you can tap to support your projects. You're going to want someone, as we said, really a lead on this, a champion, to help you achieve your goal in your organization. So it could be a staff person, it could be someone that you hire as a consultant. We will be providing you with guidance and light touch input through the process. So if you need some advice on your approach, feel free to call us. We won't be coming out to your site to do any on-site training or helping you through your conversations, but we'll be available as a resource and as a backup. And we'll be sending you materials through the grant process to help you give a little bit more context to resilience and what's happening in the field.
Okay. Does the housing have to be in an area with huge natural disaster concerns, or can it be anywhere while just keeping overall risks in mind?
These days, it seems like we're all dealing with lots of different disasters. So, you know, it would be hard to find a part of the country these days that doesn't have some kind of climate vulnerability, whether it's vulnerability directly from the climate or stress on your local utility grid resulting from the climate. So, you know, please do your best to try to, you know, understand that part of this process is identifying what your hazards are, and they're wide-ranging. And in fact, you can take a look at any one of the tools we mentioned before, some of the external tools like the Flash site, to help you understand what some of your climate hazards are, which you may not be aware of.
Okay. Combining a couple of questions here, would homeless shelters, women's shelters, or community centers be used as, for this program?
A standalone community center would not, but if a community center were part of a housing complex, we certainly could consider that. Shelters, yes, will be eligible. So if it's transitional housing or if it's permanent affordable housing, we'd be happy to consider either type. Okay.
And regarding specific purchases with the grant money, we have a repeated flooding problem, the air conditioning is breaking down, we're trying to fund window liners for the units. Would this grant be appropriate?
You know, this grant program is more intended to allow your organization to go through the process of identifying, you know, risks and hazards of your property and thinking about how to appropriately respond to them. We're not intending for the money to pay for actual structural upgrades in our property.
Okay. I'm not seeing additional questions in my queue. Krista or Lori, sometimes questions are.
Well, I'd like to follow up on what Krista just said. I just want to mention, you know, if you know some fixes to a problem like flooding could be very obvious, and the purpose of this is really to try to figure out what may not be as obvious, and to try to figure out with community input, with stakeholder input, all kinds of ways you can mitigate or adapt to those climate risks. And so I think that air conditioning example was a great one. You know that you have one single thing to do to mitigate. That's a great step. But a lot of times there's multiple ways you can deal with the situation. And so one of one aspect of this that we're very interested in is your process by determining the solution and who weighs in and how you actually define and design that path forward, because that's a challenge that's confronting so many affordable housing developers around the country right now. So we're really interested in that process that you step through, and we will walk through that with you over the term of this grant period.
Excellent. Thank you for that. While we wait to see if we get some more questions in, just a notice, when you leave today's webinar, you will be taken to a very quick survey, and we'd love to get your feedback. It would be really helpful for us. Shouldn't take you more than just a couple minutes, so that would be terrific if you could do that. And I'm looking through. Okay, yeah, got a couple more questions here to get us to the end here. We have a question on the deadline. It does seem a little short for how big of an ask it was. Did they miss something?
It was 3 weeks, so we encourage all of you that are able to submit responses by the deadline to do so. We think that if you read through the RFP, which includes at the end of that RFP the questions which will be included in that slide room application, which are required to apply, we try to make it as straightforward as possible, and do hope if you're able that you'll be able to respond.
Great. And I'm not sure if this one is a repeat. Did I ask you yet if there was a minimum project size in terms of the number of units?
There's no minimum project size. As long as there's a component of affordable housing, we'd be happy to consider it.
Okay. Well, just keeping an eye out for anything else new.
And feel free to reach out to us about any questions you have around potential city partnerships or state partnerships. As I mentioned before, there's an incredible network that is sponsored by 100 Resilient Cities, but there's a lot of great work happening in cities around the country by planning agencies and under mayor guidance from mayors, and we would really invite you to look at what your local city or community or municipality is doing, because there could be some interesting tie-in between your project and your city or municipality, and ways of demonstrating perhaps how to run a climate assessment or identify design for resilience strategies that you could bring to scale at the city level as well. So we welcome you to look at that. And also there's a lot of great work happening around mitigation and adaptation in your communities around the country. So if you don't know about that work, we'd invite you to look at that. And again, reach out if you have any questions.
Great. And I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A box. Laurie or Krista, do you have any wrap-up words for us?
Just please read the RFP in full from our grants page, and we look forward to reviewing your application.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much to our presenters today, and thank you to you, our attendees. We wish you the best of luck, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This now concludes the session. Goodbye.